Welcome back to Leftist Labor History. My name is Nate, and I'm the host, and this is going to be the wrap-up. So let's hear the intro real quick for the last time. So this is the epilogue. This episode is just going to be, I've taken us up through the 90s, up through present day with the latest episode. Or I don't know. I don't remember. It's been too long. And honestly, I don't really remember where the last episode ended, but basically it caught us up to present, and now this is going to be kind of a wrap up and just kind of what's the takeaways? What do we take from this long history of labor in America, and what could possibly be the future of labor and the left in the United States? So, just to kind of give us some context, well, right now, as I'm recording this is March 1st, 2022. And this last fall, you may have heard in the news, you may have caught wind of Striketober. So last fall, there was really kind of a wave of strikes and labor actions, workplaces organizing, and asking for their unions to be recognized. And a lot of people have turned attention to labor, where labor issues had gone ignored. So what do we make of Striketober and the current kind of movement we're in? So in the last couple of months, since October and November, Starbucks shops have been organizing. In the last couple of days, a Starbucks store in Mesa, Arizona, successfully voted to organize their store. So that's a big victory. So what do we make of Striketober? What do we make of Starbucks stores organizing? Well, first off, I want to say, in terms of numbers, right? So just to be clear, 2021 was a rather unremarkable year in terms of the number of union petitions filed. I think there were actually slightly more petitions filed in 2020. So all the attention that's been turned towards labor last year going into this year this marks a cultural shift. This is not exactly a big wave of, this is not a massive wave of workers organizing, but it's not nothing, right? Because lots of people have increasingly favorable views of unions. There's been a lot of there's been a lot more coverage. Media has ignored this kind of stuff in the past, just outright ignored. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media. I think the pandemic plays a large role in that, but also, social media, people connecting to these stories of people who are striking and being able to make their case directly to people about why they're going on strike. Right. So pandemic issues, being overworked, Kellogg's workers talked about working 7-hour weeks for weeks on end, no breaks, 1 or 2 days breaks. And then they're coming back in for 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. And it's pretty grueling. Right. And so there's a lot more sympathy for workers. Culturally, the tide seems to be turning. Now, at the same time, I don't want to, we don't want to overestimate that. We're kind of in the middle of something. And so it's kind of hard to say exactly what this all means while it's still happening. But it does seem to be that it does seem to be a kind of turning point. At the same time, right? Private sector labor union density is near an all-time low. There actually were, I mean, we're at like 8 or 9% private sector union density, which is extremely low, right? Comparable, but at the same time, right? This is comparable numbers to the late 20s. So what's going to happen in the future? Well, nobody knows. Nobody can really tell. But that's kind of where we're at. It is significant that we're seeing Starbucks workers organize. The reason being is not because, I mean, there's not a particular type of person or, person with a particular politics or ideology that works at Starbucks, right? But the nature of that role is the product of history. So when you look at, this as a labor historian, right? So when I look at a job at Starbucks, when I look at the job of the barista, Starbucks barista. So Starbucks represents a de-skilled version of a coffee shop, right? It has kind of the trappings of a coffee shop where you can go and you get free Wi-Fi, or you can read a book, and you can hang out. And it kind of cultivates that ambiance, but the position, the labor provided has been de-skilled. So pulling a good shot of espresso is a skill that takes time and practice, and a good barista is a skilled position. Starbucks has Starbucks fills up their drinks with milk and sugar, right? To really mask the taste of what is not a good shot of espresso, right? Like they don't care about pulling a good shot of espresso. I'm not a coffee expert. I grew up Mormon, so I'm not a coffee expert. But this is an example of a corporate chain that has taken a skilled position. I mean, all positions are skilled, but has taken, a particular position and turned it into this kind of entry level position in order to not let labor get in the way of their expansion and their brand. And so it's interesting to see Starbucks workers organize, because that position is created in opposition to labor in many senses of the word. So a lot of this, I think it's worthwhile to pay attention to these kinds of de-skilled positions. And the latest store organized in Arizona, which is very much a right to work state, right? Like this is I mean, the history of the Sun Belt, right? If you go back to my episode about deindustrialization, Arizona is one of these states where companies migrated to in order to escape labor. So what you've got organizing in all of these places where you've got labor organizing in all of these places where capital has, established these little bastions of anti-labor, anti-organizing. And so that's what's significant about, I mean, because, right, like 3 Starbucks stores across the country, and these stores have like 20 people working in them, right? These are not big, by the numbers, these are not big unions, but it's worthwhile paying attention to this kind of stuff. Well, what are we going to see come out of this? Well, who knows, Are all Starbucks stores going to organize? Maybe. Is the Starbucks, our executives, right? Is the corporation going to crack down on organizing? I mean, maybe. Anyway. Oh, I was going to also say, so I didn't talk about it I think it was the last episode, but there was a successful in the 90s. There was the Justice for Janitors campaign, which was SEIU, and it's kind of a similar thing, right? So it's kind of you're you see organizing in positions that have been de-skilled to make labor as kind of fungible as possible. I didn't talk about it just because I just didn't have time. I just decided to cut it. And ultimately, I mean, it doesn't directly connect like to our current moment. So, but there is this kind of precedent for these low wage positions organizing successfully, and in the 90s even. So anyway, so that's kind of our current moment. That's where we're at. I want to survey the long history of labor and provide you with some takeaways. So if you watched my introduction, I talked about how I don't feel like there are a lot of takeaways. I don't feel like there are a lot of, hard and fast lessons or cut and dry lessons to be learned. But I do think that there are some things, they're really, the ones that I'm very confident in are fairly obvious, but might as well, go ahead and articulate them. So I'm going to kind of start with the things that I think that I'm very confident in, that I think it'd be hard to read the history in any other way, while allowing for, some room for good faith disagreement. But, the first kind of takeaways, I think it'd be hard to reach a different conclusion, honestly. And then we're going to kind of get into more like speculative stuff, and I'm going to just talk at you. But, I mean, the obvious, right? The big takeaway from all of this is capital and labor under capitalism. These are antagonistic forces. What capital wants is, it wants complete control over labor, and workers are really not in. I mean, even if we wanted to, we're just not in a position to turn ourselves into robots, because we're not robots. We're human beings. And capital wants these units of labor that can be easily separated from the life of a human being. As a human, I have all sorts of familial community, all these social ties. I have needs that are at odds with the 24/7 kind of production cycle of industrial capitalism. Like there's all of these things that get in the way of me being just a machine for the extraction of labor. And that's the demand of capitalism. And it's fundamentally at odds with life. I'm not trying to be like polemical here, but these are the battle lines, right? Capital and labor are these antagonistic forces, and you look through the history and you see that at every turn. Now, if you pay attention, this is obvious, but you get all sorts of messaging, right, from these corporations. Like, you work at a job where they say we're family, we're on the same team. Your boss is trying to be your friend, and what it is it's disguising the nature of the beast. Is the boss is not your friend. HR works for the company. They're trying to extract as much labor from you as cheaply as possible. And you're trying to have a good life. You're trying to climb that hierarchy of needs and, achieve self-actualization and, have a good, healthy community and a good, healthy living environment. And so you just don't have the same goals at all, right? Antagonistic. And capital will capital will not stop. Capital will do whatever it can get away with, honestly, in order to extract labor from you. I think this is an important takeaway from labor history. You see the extremes that capital will go to. They will kill workers, right? They will, whether it's through their own private armies, their Pinkertons and their spies and their private security forces. They will do it that way. They will employ the state. They will call in the National Guard. They will definitely call the local police and the state police. If they need to, they'll call in the National Guard, and they will go to war. If workers are willing to go to war, they will definitely show out in violent force. That's the kind of, those are the stakes of the battle. So you're not on the same team because they will kill you. If they can get away with it, they will kill you. And legally, they usually get away with it. So this is another key point, right? Is the law in the United States, like the legal structure is set up to protect property. And when workers go on strike, that's an attack on property. The point of a strike is to say, you can't use the means of production. We're shutting that down. And the law the access to the means of production legally is more important to the law than human life. So this is a bit of more of in that same vein, this is lower in terms of confidence. I think there's a lot of room for kind of other opinions here. But if you look at you look at the history here, the greatest weapon that workers have in this struggle, in this battle, is the right to strike. That's the big thing. And when workers give that up through contracts or through other means, you really, really, really weaken the position of the workers. So when I talked about, I think it was in the deindustrialization episode, the Treaty of Detroit between the big three automakers and the United Automobile Workers, UAW. It was, anyway. They signed a 5-year contract, and they signed away their ability to go on strike. And the reason I highlighted that is it can seem like it seems like such a tempting option if you're getting, a good contract. But that's kind of a turning point in the history of American labor. This is the reason why industrial workers of the world historically have not signed contracts, right? So, they don't want to be drawn into that game of legal structures and the kind of political, that when you get on in that framework and on that footing, capital has the advantage. Capital can use the law against you. Am I saying never, ever, ever, give away your right to strike? I'm not going to go that far, but it almost can't be overstated how important and how powerful striking is. But again, there can be there can be different interpretations. There can be different arguments, for and against that kind of proposition. Okay, so kind of along those lines, right? This is another takeaway. So when I looked at what Marx had, some of what Marx had said about trade unions, he felt that they were good and necessary, and he felt like that's a very natural and good thing for unions to organize and get what they need out of their job, get an approximation of what it is, the value that they're creating. But at the same time, he saw the tendency, Marx saw the tendency of these trade unions to get enveloped into the bourgeois political structure. And I think that's right. I think he was, he kind of theorized that, and he saw it happening in England. And I think that our labor history has borne that out. The AFL-CIO is the prime example where there was this remarkably powerful union in the mid 20th century, and as it becomes this political organization, effectively kind of a wing of the Democratic Party. It's just become a shell of it. I mean, over the last half century, it's become a shell of what it was, and that's because it's trying to play this. It's trying to play this game where it's fundamentally at a disadvantage, right? And it's completely lost. I mean, this. I think there's a strong correlation there between the loss of radicalism and its loss of power. So I've kind of given you an introduction to this process. I've given an introduction to you to this process and how it happened, of how big labor lost so much of its power. Of course, it's an incredibly complex story, and I'm not trying to boil it down to one element, but the CIO purged radicals, and it merged with the AFL. And at some point along that way, right? And then you have the Treaty of Detroit in 55. Like all of these things, at some point along the way, like labor kind of lost its vision to a certain degree, and it became this kind of it's like you get so afraid of losing what you have that you don't want to risk it in order to. I mean, it's kind of like. This is what we see with the Democratic Party of the last 30 years, is like, we're going to cling to these tiny gains, and not risk actually winning the whole argument because we're afraid of losing the battle or whatever. I don't know. I don't have a fully formed thought about that. But the only point is that Marx seems not to have envisioned a radical proletariat revolution coming by way of trade unions, and I think that's right. I think that's right. Again, I mean, there's room for disagreement there. Anyway, so one takeaway, another takeaway, and this is not a very satisfying takeaway, but it is, I think, true that the history of United States labor is a very mixed bag. I mean, it's kind of a microcosm of the United States as a whole, where you have these veins or these threads of radicalism and really powerful organizing, really great examples of putting these great ideals and these great philosophies and theories into practice. And at the same time, you've got racism and sexism and xenophobia and siding with the boss, competing with other unions, right? Like siding with the boss against other labor unions. Like you've got it all. You've got the whole spectrum there. I don't think that there's a lot to be gained by romanticizing any of it. I think that, especially leftists, right? Like if you're kind of a liberal, center liberal, whatever, and you want to, valorize labor, I mean, that's up to you. But I think as leftists, we got to be clear-eyed about the shortcomings of labor organizing in the past. That being said, I think that there is a lot of promise in labor organizing to kind of erode a lot of these hierarchies, to erode prejudice. I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of promise there. In starting with, hey, we have this shared interest. We work at the same place. We all hate our boss. Everybody hates their boss, right? Start there. Absolutely. Start there and see what solidarity feels like. And then from there, it's all kind of anecdotal. I did see one study about this, but I think this is a very useful and valuable way for people to start to see themselves as part of a class and part of as a society and as a community, and not, oh, transgender people are going to harm me somehow. It's like, well, no, I work with this trans person. They're great. We both hate our boss. So yeah, what's the problem? What was my other thing? So speaking of solidarity, right? Have you seen the Irishman? Is that Pacino? I forget. It's been too long. But in the Irishman, solidarity, the Jimmy Hoffa character. Anyway, God, this is one way. This is a very reductive way of looking at U.S. labor history. But I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't think it really holds up that well if you start really digging into it. But if you look at labor history in this country as if you look at it as a history of solidarity, I think you can kind of get a lot of insights out of that. In terms of what has been possible and what is possible. There are some real challenges to establishing class consciousness in this country, and the labor history bears that out, right? But I think solidarity is the whole game. Like, that's the whole goal. And this is another thing that I think that it comes out. I may have a blind spot here. I'm open to being wrong about this. I don't think I'm wrong, but I think that it really bears, the history bears this out, that if you're not always trying to expand the circle of who you stand in solidarity with, it ultimately works against you, right? There's obviously like a very practical limit, which is why, right, like trade unions, craft unions are generally very successful in getting concessions from capital, is because you have you've kind of limited the amount of people in your bargaining unit. In craft and trade unions, especially, it's skilled workers that the company needs in the short term. And so that can be a very successful way to organize if you're doing the kind of bread and butter organizing. But over time, the more divisions that you can cede to in your class, and I'm talking about globally, the more divisions that you accept, the worse off over the long term, the worse off your organizing is, and the worse off your position will be. As long as you cooperate in that establishment of a hierarchy, the boss is always going to be knocking you down a rung. So you may be able to hold on to your spot by putting others down, but eventually the boss is going to put you in that same position. And I feel like that's the way it goes. So I think it's morally and ethically right to establish solidarity across borders, across all sorts of racial, sexual, gender, ethnic divides. I think that that's really powerful in a moral and ethical sense, but I think strategically, especially if you're looking long term, and especially if you really want to disrupt, the pattern and the structure of capital, you have to always be opening that wider. Not with racists though, right? Not with hardened neo-Nazis. Do you organize with Trump voters? That's going to be up to the people. But this is, if you've seen, Richard Rorty's kind of paradox of tolerance thing, where if you are equally tolerant of all views, then you're going to be giving a voice to people who want to, restrict tolerance and speech and so on. And I think the absolute same. I mean, like if you organize with a racist, with an anti-Semite, you're limiting the number of people that you can organize with, right? And that's kind of the exception, or I mean that's the paradox there, is like if you organize with actively hateful people who are going to keep other people out, that's that's a no-go. You can't do that, right? So I mean you have to organize with people who are going to be open, who at least will entertain the idea of pushing that, the borders of solidarity, in my opinion anyway. So now I'm going to get a little bit more speculative. I'm going to kind of give you my interpretation on things. So I think if you look at the United States, it's kind of uniquely favorable to capital, which is to say, it's kind of uniquely hard on workers compared to other colonial powers. The United States is very really hard on its workers, and yet the political structure in this country is very rigid. I think it's kind of an interesting. I think it's an interesting kind of puzzle to piece out. So my interpretation of this is, in terms of this very resilient political structure in the face of extreme inequality. Well, I think it really goes back to, the very beginnings of British North America. In that first episode, I kind of talked about how, these British colonies survived because they were shipping, paupers. They were British people who were living on the streets, couldn't make a living in England, were signing up to, they're risking their lives, right? They could have died at sea. The death rate in the early British colonies was extremely high. Whether or not they knew that, who knows? But these were desperate people, and they were going in the hopes that they might, make a living and actually get a piece of land. And this was the bargain. In the first, few decades of British North America, the colonies were dying. Everyone was dropping like flies. They needed warm bodies. And so part of the bargain was, oh yeah, we'll make these promises of, to these indentured servants, knowing that a lot of them are going to die, and they're not going to have to really, they're just going to get free labor for, before the time these people die. And if they do make it through their indenture, they're in pretty good shape. And some of them ended up owning land, which was impossible in their position in England. So when we talk about, when we talk about the American dream and this idea of a land of opportunity, a lot of that is propaganda. Don't buy into it. But I would say have a healthy respect for that idea, because a lot of people, that's come true for a lot of people. For an individual, the system that allowed that one person to get a piece of land, own property, right? To really make a jump in class from street urchin to petty bourgeois, that's a really powerful thing, and that's part of our national imagination. And there's a little bit of truth in that mythology. And as time has gone on, right, that has become harder and harder to get. But everybody in this country really thinks oh, I could be the next Bill Gates, I could be the next Zuckerberg or whatever. The reality, right, is compare our country to other countries in the global north, and our social mobility is lower. people think it's higher, but it's really not. I mean, even compared to like these Nordic, social democratic states, um, social mobility is higher at these places with a social safety net, the welfare state. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. But we have this idea that, we have this idea of like hardship and overcoming your obstacles. And that's kind of this psychological, really indoctrination. That's kind of part and parcel of the American dream. But this thing has this idea is really powerful. And another thing that's really powerful about it is it's been tied up for the entire history of this country. It's been tied up in ideas of white supremacy and settler colonialism. But Trump, as explicitly racist and xenophobic and homophobic as he was, he saw Latinx people and Black people vote for him. Right? This is a message that can actually appeal to people who want to better their station in life. Believe me, I got every criticism in the world of this idea, but it's still a powerful idea, and it's a powerful sales pitch. And I think that as leftists in the U.S., I think we have to have a healthy respect for this idea. I'm not saying to humor it or to go easy on it, but understand this is what keeps our political order and power. Honestly, I say that because going back to labor history. This is in one of the episodes. I think it was the deindustrialization episode. I read this quote from Melvin Dubovsky from his conclusion in his history of the industrial workers of the world. And he's pointing out the irony that that organized labor has its origins in radical militancy. And what it was that really kind of like that de-radicalized big labor was not violent force, but the fact that like a lot of these workers got a house and a car, they made that jump to they themselves as individuals found themselves in a better place than their parents had been, right? So generationally they moved up. That was made possible by big labor, but it made people less committed to the cause of workers, right? So, and I kind of discussed that a little bit critically when I read that quote before, but I think it really hits on an irony in the trajectory of this country, of the 20th century United States, right? And the irony there, I mean, to kind of build off of that, is that this is labor. This is big labor saving capital from itself. Right. It's the idea of the New Deal as a last ditch effort to keep people from just overthrowing the whole thing. And this is something that the United States is very successful at, is all of our culturally and institutionally, this country is geared toward getting that one individual, as long as he or she or they, but usually he, as long as they're willing to leave everybody else behind, they can move up the ladder. That's kind of the whole game. Does capital want people to move up the ladder? No, it doesn't. The capital wants everybody on the bottom. But there are all these institutions, and organized labor, paradoxically, is one of these institutions that keep some semblance of social mobility alive. So let me be clear about what I mean by that. So if we accept the premise that labor increases social mobility and therefore de-radicalizes the proletariat, does that mean that we should not organize labor? No, I don't mean that at all. And I also don't. Okay, so let me be clear. Let me explain what I mean by that. I think that I do think that improving your material station in life makes these things less urgent, but at the same time, it frees people up to organize and to imagine a better world and to agitate for a better world. And I hold up the 60s and 70s, as imperfect as that kind of radicalism was, and like the hippie movement, as imperfect as that was, when you get people who have free time, who have leisure, you get people who start to care about, like, you're not going to get a revolution by chaining somebody to a machine for 80 hours a week. You might get the will, but practically, how do you do that? How do you organize people who work 3 jobs? It's very difficult. So I'm trying to be as clear as possible here, because I think that this can go a lot of different ways. I think that the benefits of labor organizing, I don't see a lot of radical militancy. I don't think the revolution in the United States is going to come from organized labor. Regardless, I am in favor of people getting their material needs and immediate needs met. And if that comes through labor organizing, then that in itself is good. Like, that's an intrinsic good. Marx said as much, right? So I'm not an accelerationist. Good Lord, I can't stress enough that I'm not an accelerationist. And again, the big reason there is, I think that if we push this country to a breaking point, it's going to go fascist before it goes socialist. Convince me otherwise, right? Show your work if you think that there's going to be a proletariat revolution from some future crisis. And I will point you to every crisis of my lifetime, in which case people have pitched rightward. I think that labor organizing is a fantastic way and an invaluable way to get people's needs met. It also increases consumption for things that are very bad for our climate. And that is, I don't know how to really square that. Don't push me on that. I don't know how to answer you, honestly. I don't know how that's going to work. But I think ultimately, long term, I think you got to get people. You can't just have a bunch of people in desperate circumstances, because, yeah, they might pick up weapons and go to war against their boss. Or they might break hard right, honestly. And we're currently in a fourth resurgence of explicit white nationalism, and that's not something that you want to mess around with. I do not believe in pushing society to the breaking point. So I think labor organizing is more or less an intrinsic good for those reasons, and I think that it's a really good, valuable way for people to practice solidarity. I think it can be. I mean, like, organized labor was a haven for communists and anarchists and other radicals in the first 20th century, and it can be that again, right? But anyway, I mean, there is that paradox there. There is that irony at work where, yeah, I mean, if you do, soften the contradictions of capital, like you may. I just don't really see any benefit from intentionally creating a crisis in society. Especially not in the United States. We're so fascistic by nature and by culture already. Like, that's just really, really playing with fire. Anyway, so yeah, also that being said, right, I don't see a socialist revolution happening in the United States in my lifetime. I do not see it. if you want to support global socialism, you support socialism in the places where it already exists, which is not the United States. And I think the way to do that is opposing U.S. imperialism, opposing the State Department and CIA and the Department of Defense. I mean, really, like you look at the Cold War up into present. The biggest deterrent to global socialism is not any kind of intrinsic flaw in socialism. It's the CIA and the State Department. With the military in Vietnam serving as kind of the ultimate example of like what we will do to socialist governments if it comes to that. Like if we are not able to harness, right-wing paramilitaries, we will drop an unprecedented amount of bombs on your country and on your neighboring countries until you acquiesce, right? So I don't see a lot of potential for revolutionary activity in the United States. I don't see an armed conflict breaking out very soon. Unless it's kind of like anti-fascist, like, beating back the brown shirts in your community, which is shockingly, that's very frighteningly possible in the near term. So what do we do? So I guess I'll kind of leave you with this analogy, and this is just my own personal feeling, take it or leave it. What do we do as people in the United States or or from wherever you're watching, which is, an English speaking, or, if you speak English and you're tuned into the labor history of the United States, and you're curious about what to do or what will happen. Here's my 2 cents. Here's my theory. Here's my philosophy. So, I like the outdoors. I like hiking. I like camping. Pine trees are pretty cool. Obviously, there's a lot of pine trees around. But here's the thing. Here's the cool thing about pine trees is they are very well adapted to shallow, rocky soil. They can grow right on top of big boulders. They have shallow roots, which kind of, get into whatever topsoil is available to get their nutrients. And they're adapted to fire. Here's the thing is, as United States leftists, I think here's my analogy. I think we should be adapted to fire. We should be adapted to rocky, inhospitable soil, and we should be used to purges coming through and cleaning out our organizations. I think that's something we can almost kind of count on with regularity. Just as like in the Rocky Mountains, wildfires happen with regularity, and pine forests have adapted to this. Specifically, there's different species of pine. There's only a few that have this kind of cone, but certain species like the lodgepole pine have this serotinous, I think that's how you say it, have these serotinous cones. And the cones are sealed shut with a resin until a wildfire comes through and melts that resin, and the cones kind of expand and drop their seeds into all that, and like once the fire, passes through, drops the seeds into that ash. And so the first thing that comes up, eventually over time, like different, seeds from other plants and other species will come in and start to populate that. But the first thing that comes up are those pine trees, because as soon as that fire goes through, they're already right there. And I think that's kind of a cool thing. I think, all of the natural adaptations of the natural world are very cool. I'm a humanities guy who doesn't really understand it very much. But I think the analogy there, I think if you want to draw a lesson from that, it's to make your seed. And again, if you look at a big, huge, giant pine tree that's 100 feet tall, the seeds are really, really very small. Like the kernel in that seed is tiny. This is why pine nuts are so expensive. It's because they're very well protected and they're very small relative to the thing that they're coming from. And so I think we should make our seeds, if nothing else, we make our seeds, as good as they can possibly be, and we protect them. And like this, to bring it back to Marx or to Gramsci, right? Like Marx's idea of social reproduction, Gramscian idea of hegemony. We are always internalizing the logic of capitalism just by existing. Practically everything we read and everything, you go into work and the logic of capitalism is always just in our face and we can't help but internalize it, right? But if we do nothing else but revise that logic and to become more of community focused and to practice solidarity and to support workers across the globe, you just improve your seed and keep your seed protected. And when the time comes, then then the next generation is going to be stronger. So that's my analogy. It's corny. And I wish I can't find my pine cone. I think I might've thrown it out. I was going to kind of use it as an object lesson. Anyway. So one last thing. So the last thing it shows as kind of a final sign off. This is the last episode of this series that I'm going to do. I may very well just retire from doing this kind of stuff. I don't particularly love talking at a camera and a microphone. But if there's a reason to make a new episode, I'm all about it. So if you've got questions, if you got feedback, if you're curious about something, you want me to do a deeper dive on a topic, I'm definitely open to that. I'm not an expert on any particular topic, but I've studied some stuff and I can study more. But if you are an expert and you want to talk to me about something and add context, add information, or kind of correct the record on something that you think I've misinterpreted or gotten wrong, then I'm absolutely open to that. Get in touch with me. Comment on the YouTube comments. If I do see a good reason to make it another one of these, then I will. But if you have feedback, I'm definitely open to that. Anyway, thanks for checking out this series. Hopefully you have checked out the entire series. I did it because I think it's valuable, so hopefully you agree. And I appreciate you coming around. This has been Leftist Labor History, and I am signing off.